On the night of September 9, 1971, one of the most remarkable prison breaks in history took place in Uruguay. 111 political prisoners, all part of the Tupamaro movement, managed to escape from Punta Carretas Penitentiary. The escape was not only a daring feat of ingenuity, it was a political statement. A 45-meter tunnel, months of covert planning, and the unrelenting desire for freedom led them to defy the military dictatorship that ruled their country. The escapees included two figures who would leave a lasting impact on Uruguay's history, Raúl Sendic and José Mujica. But this story isn't just about a prison break, it's about the fight for freedom, the unbreakable spirit of resistance, and the men who risked everything to make history. Punta Carretas Penitentiary, a sprawling fortress nestled in Montevideo, Uruguay, was built during the late 1800s. It was a symbol of control and fear, a place where the worst criminals were imprisoned. But by the early 1970s, it had become the site of a different kind of captivity, one imposed by a brutal military dictatorship. Among those behind its bars were political prisoners, men who had been captured for their opposition to the military regime and their involvement in the Tupamaro movement. The Tupamaros were an urban guerrilla group that had been waging a fierce fight against the oppressive government. Formed in the 1960s, the group carried out daring heists, kidnappings, and military-style operations to disrupt the dictatorship and fight for the rights of the oppressed. They were viewed by the government as terrorists, but by many in Uruguay they were seen as revolutionaries, standing up to a regime that had stripped the people of their rights. Among the prisoners in Punta Carretas were two men who would become icons of resistance in Uruguay, Raúl Sendic and José Mujica. Raúl Sendic, the son of an Uruguayan working-class family, became the leader of the Tupamaros and a symbol of the struggle for social justice. His fiery commitment to the cause earned him the nickname the Robin Hood of Uruguay, as he was known for his efforts to redistribute wealth and resources to the poor. José Mujica, a younger figure in the Tupamaro movement, was known for his humility, dedication, and fierce idealism. Both men had been captured by the military after several years of underground resistance and were incarcerated in Punta Carretas. Uruguay, in the 1970s, was a nation teetering on the edge. The military dictatorship had taken control in 1973, overthrowing the democratically elected government. In response to the growing political unrest, the military regime cracked down on dissidents, curtailing civil liberties and expanding its control over the population. The Tupamaros, who had once been seen as a group of idealistic rebels fighting for the disenfranchised, were now considered a major threat to the stability of the state. The repression was brutal. Thousands of people were arrested, tortured, and even disappeared in the regime's effort to silence any opposition. Many of those imprisoned were members of the Tupamaro movement, including Sendic and Mujica. The military junta had no tolerance for dissent, and those who were captured were subjected to extreme conditions. Torture, solitary confinement, and deprivation were standard practices in the government's effort to break the spirit of the opposition. But the Tupamaros were not so easily defeated. They were fueled by a belief that their struggle was just, that they were fighting not just for themselves but for the future of their country. Even behind bars, they refused to abandon their cause. Their imprisonment did not quell their fire. Instead, it hardened their resolve. As the months passed in the oppressive confines of Punta Carretas, the prisoners grew more determined to find a way out. They were not just political prisoners, they were symbols of defiance. The conditions were brutal, but the Tupamaros were no strangers to hardship. If anything, their time in prison only strengthened their belief in the cause. Among the Tupamaros, escape wasn't just a desire for personal freedom. It was a way to strike a blow against the dictatorship that had sought to crush their movement. The idea of escaping Punta Carretas was more than just about physical liberty. It was about making a statement that the regime could not control them, that no prison, no matter how secure, could hold them forever. The idea of tunneling out had been discussed among the prisoners for months. They knew that a direct assault on the guards would be suicidal. They had no weapons, and any attempt to force their way out would have been met with brutal retaliation. But a tunnel. This was their chance. The idea came from within the ranks of the prisoners who had experience with clandestine operations. After all, the Tupamaros were experts in working underground, both literally and metaphorically. They had a history of covert operations, and now it was time to turn that expertise inward. The plan was incredibly risky. The tunnel would have to be dug in secret, without the knowledge of the guards. Every day, the prisoners would have to dig a little bit more, taking the earth they removed and hiding it under their clothing, smuggling it out or distributing it throughout the prison yard. They would need to keep a constant watch on the guards, so no one suspected what they were up to. But despite the risks, they began to work. The tunnel became their collective goal. It was their ticket to freedom, a symbol of resistance against the regime that had imprisoned them. The tunnel's construction began in secrecy, as the prisoners took turns digging beneath the floors of their cells. Each day they moved a little closer to the outside world, but the process was grueling. The tunnel had to be precise. If it was too shallow, the guards would uncover it. If it was too deep, it would take too long to finish. They had no room for error. The tools were primitive at best. Spoons, nails, and improvised picks were the weapons of choice. Each tool was used and reused, often until it broke or bent beyond recognition. The prisoners dug in shifts, sometimes working in the dead of night when the prison was quietest, but the constant fear of discovery loomed over them. A single misstep, a single wrong move, and the escape would be over before it began. As they dug, the prisoners faced more than just the physical challenge of breaking through the layers of concrete and earth. They also had to contend with the psychological toll of their isolation. They were working in silence, inch by inch, knowing that they had one chance, and one chance only, to escape. The psychological pressure was immense, yet every day they made progress. Their resolve grew stronger. Their bond of solidarity deepened as they shared in the labor and the risks. Finally, after months of digging, the tunnel was ready. It wasn't the end of their struggle, it was just the beginning of a more perilous journey. The night of September 9th, 1971, would go down in history as the night 111 prisoners defied the impossible. At midnight, the first prisoner crawled through the tunnel. One by one, they emerged into the darkness outside the prison walls. They had made it. But even as the taste of freedom lingered, the reality of the situation settled in. They were not just escaping a prison. They were escaping an entire country that would soon be on the lookout for them. The government would launch an intense manhunt. They had no time to celebrate. The fight for survival had only just begun. Among the 111 escapees were two men whose names would become synonymous with resistance in Uruguay, Raúl Sendic and José Mujica. Raúl Sendic had already been a revolutionary figure, a leader of the Tupamaros who had led bold operations against the dictatorship. His commitment to the cause had earned him a place in history, and his escape was a continuation of that fight. Sendic had been imprisoned for years, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Even in prison, he was a leader. His participation in the escape sent a message. The military dictatorship could imprison his body, but it could never imprison his will. José Mujica, younger and less known at the time, was also part of the escape. Mujica's humility and fierce commitment to justice would later make him one of Uruguay's most beloved presidents. But in 1971, he was still a revolutionary, fighting for freedom and a better future for his country. His escape was not just a personal victory, but a victory for the ideals he had fought for from the very beginning. Once the escape was discovered, the authorities launched a full-scale manhunt. The government's anger and humiliation were palpable. A group of 111 prisoners had managed to escape from one of the most secure prisons in the country, and now they would stop at nothing to recapture them. The military set up checkpoints, questioned civilians, and even imposed curfews in an attempt to find the escapees. Some of the prisoners were recaptured, but many of them vanished into the underground resistance. They became part of a larger struggle, and their escape galvanized the people against the dictatorship. Even in the face of the manhunt, they continued to resist. The escape from Punta Carretas was more than just an act of defiance. It was a turning point. The Tupamaros' boldness emboldened others to rise against the dictatorship. The escape had sent shockwaves through the government and the people. Despite the military's best efforts, the Tupamaros were not finished. The legacy of that escape continues to resonate in Uruguay today. Raúl Sendic and José Mujica would go on to play significant roles in Uruguay's future. Mujica, in particular, would become president in 2010, serving as one of the most progressive leaders the country had ever seen. His presidency, characterized by its humility and focus on social justice, was shaped by the struggles he had faced during his time as a prisoner and resistance fighter. The escape from Punta Carretas is not just a story about breaking out of prison. It is a story about the power of resistance, the strength of the human spirit, and the unyielding desire for freedom. The 111th escapees defied the odds and proved that even the most oppressive regimes cannot break the will of the people. Their story is a testament to the fact that no matter how great the chains, the human spirit will always find a way to break free. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel for more interesting videos.